Hello there, you're watching Context and I'm Orkan Amashov here. The fourth edition of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum is now over. For those either specializing in the subject of the South Caucasus, with a particular emphasis on possible modes of future cooperation models between Azerbaijan, Armenia and Georgia, or generally interested in this region's global importance in the pecking order of continental fault lines, the panel discussion involving foreign ministers from these three countries was indeed a key centerpiece. Conceptually framed as a conversation on challenges and opportunities for regional cooperation in the South Caucasus, the panel discussion was largely centered around the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process, with foreign ministers Ceyhun Bayramov and Ararat Mirzayan exchanging views on the key impediments towards the conclusion of a deal between their respective countries, and Georgia's role as a platform for dialogue between Baku and Yerevan, with Foreign Minister Mako Bocharashvili expounding on her nation's wider role. Many observers emphasized the good chemistry between the Azerbaijani and Armenian foreign ministers and the nature of the actual debate, which could be regarded as the very first official public discussion of this type on the Armenian constitution as a key impediment towards the conclusion of a peace deal between these two nations. Nigar Gaksar of the International Crisis Group acted as a sole respondent to the panel, reflecting on the geopolitical upheaval and domestic pressures that make progress on the agreed text between the sides time-sensitive, mistrust on both sides, and the question of different sequencing and so forth. Both this contribution and the actual exchange between the Azerbaijani and Armenian foreign ministers have re-emphasized two different perceptions of the timing, with their seize the moment now and sign the deal mentality being seen as opposed to a more careful approach centered around the idea that sustainable and durable change, and for that matter a peace deal itself, can be attained in a more incremental way by means of sorting out certain fixables as a matter of priority. And today, joining me to discuss the latest trilateral panel involving three foreign ministers, the question of a comprehensive regional integration model in the South Caucasus, challenges and opportunities. Ahead are Dr. George Michelishvili, Associate Professor of the European University, Tbilisi, Georgia, and Tabib Husseinov, Independent Researcher and Policy Analyst, Baku, Azerbaijan. Great to have both of you on the show.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So let's crack on with immediate effect, as we are habituated to say here. George, first of all, this panel discussion was quite interesting, and many people talk about the chemistry between the two foreign ministers, nature of the debate, which was quite open. What are your thoughts?
Well, in the first place, I like that this discussion took within the framework of the Antalya Diplomatic Forum, which is a very important event, which became a part of the international diplomatic landscape. And it also showed that Turkey is developing its role as an independent and responsible actor. But the most important fact that this discussion, this exchange was without any facility. Well, it was in Turkey, yeah, it was in Antalya, but so other than that, it was independent will of Armenian and Azerbaijani counterparts, top-ranking officials, foreign ministers, to discuss, not within the framework of Brussels, not within the framework of Moscow, of Washington, just between themselves. And that's the most important. I think that the durable peace and when finally this conflict will be behind us, will be achieved when the countries have their own vested interests, when they sort out their differences by themselves without any party trying to shape the peace agreement, maybe on their terms to a certain extent, or with their interest in mind. So first of all, it is the South Caucasus, well, first of all, these two countries, and the South Caucasus in its immediate neighborhood, which stand to benefit the most. And this meeting was, as Armenian Foreign Minister put, an important brick. Well, it's just one brick, it has to be followed by the others. Well, we can see that sometimes peace process is fragile, is very much dependent on the domestic situation in the two countries, but that's an important step forward. no doubt.
Tabib, I would like to hear your reflections about that trilateral panel discussion. The central element in that panel was, of course, the exchange between Arat Mirzoyan and Ceyhun Bayramov. So, Tabib, there was one moment when Arat Mirzoyan was expanding on the ways in which OSCE Minsk Group could be dismantled, dissolved. He said that, do we have a conflict? That's a very interesting question. On the ground, we don't have a conflict. But we don't have a peace deal, therefore perhaps we do have a conflict. He said something along those lines. Would you be able to reflect on that particular moment and also share with us your general thoughts?
Well, indeed, my impression from the discussion was also that the discussion was dominated mainly by Armenian-Azerbaijani questions, issues, and Georgia was somewhat sidelined in this particular panel. But specifically, I mean, I would like to mention about Georgia's role. I think that Georgia really has a big role to play in Armenian-Azerbaijani peace process. It is the closest neighbor to both Armenia and Azerbaijan. It is best positioned to play the role of a facilitator. And I think that it's very clear to everyone, including to Armenians and the rest of the world, that Minsk Group has no perspective. It has no future. And if we look at the recent negotiation process, all the major successes in the Armenian-Azerbaijani peace process have been achieved in a bilateral format. If we look at over the last year, for example, if we look at the May 24 delimitation process, when Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed on delimitation of 12, slightly over 12 kilometers of their bilateral border. And that, excuse me?
So you talk about the length of that area that has been delimited, demarcated between Azerbaijan and Armenia, right?
Yes, so we actually delimited. We delimited our border without any Minsk Group or any other mediators. So that was a major success. Another success was in October 24 when Armenia and Azerbaijan bilaterally agreed on legal and procedural framework for future delimitation. And now we also have, since March, we have an agreed text of the draft peace agreement. It was also achieved through bilateral talks. So in that sense, Azerbaijan doesn't really need any mediators or any Minsk Group, and that's very clear. But Georgia has a unique role as a closest, as I mentioned in the beginning, as a closest neighbor, which enjoys trustful relations with both Armenia and Azerbaijan. And in that sense, I think it has a very big potential, positive potential to play in Armenian-Azerbaijani peace process. So I think that that's something that we can perhaps delve into more during our discussions.
Thank you, Tov. Indeed, Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process has been bilateral for some considerable time already. Some people say it has been bilateral since October 2023, purely with Brussels and Washington being sort of sidelined and Baku and Yerevan deciding on the most important issues, including the issues related to delimitation and demarcation on a bilateral basis. Georgia's role is very important. Azerbaijan and Armenia are both acutely conscious of this. Recently, during ADA Policy Forum, President Aliyev talked extensively about Georgia. He said that Azerbaijan and Georgia, over the past 3 decades or so, have created this comprehensive cooperation model based on transport lines, energy supply lines, and effectively, if there is a peace deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia could also be sort of integrated into this system, which is already there, and it will be tripartite system. He also talked about the statement made by Ursula von der Leyen, which was, I think, made in Central Asia, in Samarkand, wherein the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process and the Turkish-Armenian normalization were described as 2 key elements necessary to connect this South Caucasus with Central Asia without mentioning Georgia. So there's a sense that Georgia, due to its current political situation, is not being viewed as a vital linkage in this grand scheme of connectivity agenda. What do you make of this interesting and intriguing moment?
Georgia stands to win a lot after Armenia, Azerbaijan, so because of this, as a result, peace process, because it will lay a foundation of the genuine South Caucasus region with mutual interdependence, with intertwined economies, infrastructure, which makes the region of three countries far more attractive. Well, we have a, I would say, partial region, so with tripartite Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan transportation routes, oil pipeline, gas pipeline, which were vital for Georgia. Azerbaijan, it was achieving their energy independence by bringing Azerbaijani oil and gas to the European markets. So I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was vital for putting our countries on the international scene, on the international energy market and then transportation corridors. The statement of Ursula von der Leyen, I think it is not very judicious, to put it mildly. So it ties very immediate, I would say, current complications between Georgia and European structures with the big geopolitical picture. So I think the scale of thinking and the scale of strategic planning on the part of European bureaucrats should be, larger. Mm-hmm. So obviously that was a quip, that was a kind of message showing that Georgia is not behaving well, and therefore, so you see, you stand to be punished for that behavior. And President Aliyev replied to that very eloquently, very precisely, that it's not going to be happening. So there is an extant communication line. Of course, Armenia will be added to this picture with the infrastructure and with other communication connectivity, but it will be addition to the already extant picture. It shouldn't be any replacement. And this might create, I would say, of course, a conflict, but some friction between Yerevan and Tbilisi, which is something really very undesirable. When it comes to the volumes of the middle corridor, if these lines between China and Europe opens, obviously there will be enough goods, enough services, enough transportation, enough people to transport it both via Georgia, via Azerbaijan, and some other countries.
Tabib, whilst expecting, just making my preparation for this panel discussion, taking my notes, I had been envisioning a model wherein these two foreign ministers will make their own points. Then Georgian foreign minister will talk about the ways in which Georgia could play a role of the place for dialogue. But of course, the contribution from Georgian foreign minister were very generic. So that is perfectly understandable at this current juncture, which probably re-emphasizes the importance of Azerbaijan and Armenian peace deal at this juncture, because without that deal, that House of Caucasus that we all talk about will not happen. In one of your latest, I think, academic articles titled Azerbaijan's Quest for Strategic Autonomy, you talk about the avoidance of geopolitical entanglement as part of a wider response to external pressures and a means to assert greater, more consequential agency. And in the midst of this approach, Azerbaijan, according to your writing, acts as a geopolitical connector, sort of punching above its weight and so forth. Although the current situation has been attained by means of war of 2020 and the counter-terrorism measures conducted in September 2023, what is also very obvious to many that this Azerbaijan's quest for strategic autonomy involves cooperation with Armenia as well. So could you explain to us the way you believe Armenia will be involved in Azerbaijan's greater quest for strategic autonomy?
I think it's very clear that Azerbaijan's long-term foreign policy vision is to make sure that South Caucasus countries, these three countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, are able to enter international relations as actors that are not puppets of any third country, but are actors with their own agency. In that sense, Azerbaijan is also interested to make sure that not only itself, but also Armenia has more agency in its international affairs and is not used by the third countries, whether in the north or in the west or elsewhere, to basically implement a policy of divide and rule in the South Caucasus region. So in that sense, Armenian and Azerbaijani peace process is also an effort to increase the agency of Armenia and Azerbaijan and increase the agency of the whole region, of the South Caucasus region as a whole. I think that's very important because we have been suffering for decades. Our countries, our peoples have been suffering for decades from conflicts, and these conflicts have been used by external powers to divide us and to basically prevent us from becoming more independent and more developed economically, politically, and culturally. So I think this is the vision that we need to pursue.
Thank you very much indeed, Tabib. And since you mentioned about external actors, I would like to move on to that dimension of external actors. We quite often talk about 3+3 in this region, with 3 regional countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, and 3 big neighbors, historic neighbors. I mean, Turkey, Iran, and Russia. Although at this current juncture, of course, Georgia does not accept 3+3. They always talk about 3+2. Some Azerbaijani analysts, including Rusif Husseinov, they have been talking about, let's make this 3 proper and then talk about 3+3. Sort of, we need to have this sort of Caucasian model of integration in the first place. And talking about external actors, George, it has been said that amongst those 3 external big neighbors of the South Caucasus, Turkey is the only country that is genuinely interested in internal consolidation of this region. Turkey is genuinely interested in Azerbaijan, Armenian peace process. Turkey is genuinely interested in normalization with Armenia. It will give this country a greater leverage here. But whilst others, Iran and Russia, are to be deemed in a different light. Do you agree with this proposition? And what do you want to say in terms of Turkey's increasing role in the region? In particular, bearing in mind that actually, interestingly enough, this panel discussion took place in Antalya in Turkey, which testifies to something meaningful, I imagine.
Indeed, the fact that Turkey held this discussion, and it is unimaginable today that similar panel gathers in Moscow for obvious reasons, because Georgia will not attend and there will be no invitation in the first place. Today, because of the complications of Tbilisi-Europe relations, it is unlikely to be taken in Brussels or major European capital as well, because, as we can see, they still have trouble recognizing the Georgian leadership and the Georgian government. So I believe that in this regard, Europe and the West generally is losing strategic edge, losing time, in order to become the bona fide friend and partner of the region. Obviously, our minister has mentioned, and I will also agree that European aspirations is the mainstay of the foreign policy of Georgia. But we see that because of certain policies of Georgia, because of certain reactions on the part of the European Union, now these relations are not moving forward, very unfortunately. But speaking of the regional format, it is important that our countries, our 3 countries, grow into the genuine independent state, not waiting for the others to decide their problems for them or to facilitate, or particularly actually siding with one against the other in order to the phone goals. So in this regard, we can see that Turkey, being the immediate neighbor of the South Caucasus, is vitally interested in having this region stable, prosperous, and well developed, because it is an integral part of the middle corridor, it is an integral part of the many other transportation networks, and like geopolitical equation of this, Turkey is an integral part. So I think that the three countries, and in this case Armenia, Azerbaijan, so should seize this momentum and they take advantage of the window of opportunity. Again, we know from experience, from history, these windows of opportunities have the tendency to close at some point. So, for instance, Russia, the main spoiler in the region, so right now is bogged down in Ukraine. If I wouldn't say, like, God forbid, of course, some peace agreement and some end of the war will be a boon and nice development, but Russia has more, I would say, forces and more energy released in elsewhere, it might try to re-establish its control in the South Caucasus, which is weakening at the moment. So that's why it is important to move sufficiently forward in order, like, to stimulate potential, like, Russian initiatives, like, to bring the region back in its control, because that's actually what the Russian Federation, like, wants at the moment. So it wants docile state we only ask for Russian permission before making any foreign policy and any strategic move. So there is an opportunity to finally create the South Caucasus region, which will be truly independent and who will choose itself whom to partner with and in what direction. So I hope that at some point there will be leadership in Moscow, which will be much more, I would say, willing, like, to cooperate rather than dominate.
Tabib, during that panel discussion, Nigar Göksel of the International Crisis Group put a very, very poignant question to the panel, and she said that she imagined that the years have passed and then we are looking back at 2025, and she posed this question. She said that, is it likely that we will ask this question then? Had we moved ahead then, we might have had a lasting progress before things unraveled again. So it effectively reflects on the importance of timing. There are two competing visions regarding Azerbaijani-Armenian peace deal negotiations. One is Armenian view, and then some Armenian colleagues, even Arek Kochinyan, whom I interviewed earlier, said that not signing deal now is a crime against humanity. So this approach is based on this mentality. Seize the moment now, act decisively and very swiftly, otherwise, after a certain stage, implications will be too hideous to contemplate. That's the way I understand this approach. A second approach is more Azerbaijani approach, which is based on the idea that we need to get a proper deal, and proper deal means certain eminently fixable elements, such as the Armenian constitution, such as OSCE Minsk Group. These things should be properly sorted out for us to have this crystal clear understanding that we are moving in the right direction. What do you make of these two competing considerations?
Thank you, Orhan. On your question, basically, I want to say that the peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan would be a historic achievement, and it needs to be, the conditions for signing it should be right. If we sign, imagine that if Armenia and Azerbaijan signs the peace agreement right now, with all the uncertainties over Armenia's legal and constitutional framework, with lots of accusations coming from both sides on basically the humanitarian issues, on security issues, lots of unresolved issues, including very little progress so far on the delimitation, the fact that 4 Azerbaijani exclave villages are still occupied. With all of these unresolved issues, the situation right now is not ripe for Armenia and Azerbaijan to sign this agreement. If that agreement is signed, it would just be on paper. There is no guarantee that we wouldn't have any ceasefire violations along the bilateral border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There is no guarantee that the information warfare that is waged diplomatically and online between the two countries would stop. So the point is that the situation, the environment should be ripe for Armenia and Azerbaijan to sign this agreement, and they need to sign it when there is a certainty that both nations, both peoples have accepted the vision for peace for generations to come. They need to sign it when there is no uncertainties left on constitutional and legal framework of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So that's an important point. I think that what Armenia right now needs to do, it has a homework actually to do. It needs to work on its legal and constitutional framework. There are lots of, besides constitution, there are lots of legal acts of Armenia that expressly put a question mark on Azerbaijan's territorial integrity. And those legal acts need to be rescinded. This is something that would create a new, more positive environment for both countries to move forward with the peace agenda.
Indeed, yes. There are certain perfectly sort of, as analysts here in Azerbaijan tend to say, perfectly solvable issues which could be sorted out properly, and then we will get to the point of that certainty. George, just I would like to ask the last sort of round of questions. Georgia is an important player. President Ilham Aliyev described Georgia and Azerbaijan being like two gateways, acting as two gateways in respect to each other. And it is absolutely certain that this economic interdependence, something that we have to sort of create in the South Caucasus, has been created between these two nations. But simultaneously, we find Georgia under massive pressure from the European institutions. Do you think this, and I just would like to refer to Tabib's piece about Azerbaijan's quest to strategic autonomy, wherein he argues that as a response to external pressure, Azerbaijan is consolidating its position together with regional actors, acting as a geopolitical connector and avoiding geopolitical entanglement, he says. Do you think that Georgia will also pursue the line of avoiding those geopolitical entanglements in order to retain its independence in a way that Azerbaijan sort of has retained? I know Georgia and Azerbaijan are two different countries, of course, different aspirations perhaps, but fundamentally there are certain linchpins in the context of which they are self-same. What is your reflection on that?
Well, and actually this is the issue which is being discussed, maybe not sufficiently in my opinion, like in Georgia. So generally, geopolitically, is it right to put all eggs in one basket, as Georgia did a couple of decades ago? Again, for me personally, so integration into European bureaucratic institutions, so that's the best possible choice, but it takes two to tango. When, for instance, Georgia receives criticism, I think undue and undeserved criticism, along with the criticism which is quite deserved. So then we might question, so is there willingness on the part of the European institutions like to have Georgia within its ranks rather than just a neighbor? So it brings to the fore the question of this strategic independence, strategic autonomy. I believe that Azerbaijan learned early on this lesson of that limited reliability of the Western institutions. Well, obviously it was the most egregious fact that adding insult to injury, so US Congress adopted this like 907, I would say, amendment to the Freedom Support Act, limiting aid to Azerbaijan in the most critical moments when the economy was a meltdown, when the country was suffering ethnic cleansing in Karabakh. So, well, therefore, probably it was a very eye-opening experience for Azerbaijan. So I would say that something similar to what Georgia is experiencing now, but there is a measure of disappointment on the part I would say, thinking part of the Georgian society. So whether it was a right decision, and to what extent it was the right decision to rely too much on the European Union, all the more since the membership is not in the office, is not coming anytime soon. I believe that there is a huge potential in this, in the fact of country being the candidate, because as a candidate there is a gradual approximation, there is an enormous potential of Georgia becoming economically, legalistically more integrated in the European Union. But again, so it needs political will on the part of Georgia, as well on the part of European bureaucracy. So there, I think, in this regard, there are more questions than answers in this regard. And again, okay, I don't want to be, I would say, kind of too simplistic in this regard, but probably one can say maybe to a certain extent that Azerbaijan had Turkey as a major ally, as an unconditional friend, which was helping it, no least in 2020. Provided diplomatic support and some more. And well, I believe Georgia should try to find a similar partner who will be able to defend country in difficult times. Now we see that the lack thereof is a problem. In this particular regard, we are, as a Georgian, I'm very thankful for the support that our neighbors, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey, are providing to Georgia at the moment. So trying to persuade the world, to persuade in the European structure that Georgia is an integral part of the South Caucasus and extended Central Eurasia region. And when current crisis, and I strongly believe that the current crisis in the relation will be sorted out, so life goes on, geopolitical life, geoeconomic life, and so the extant structures and extant communication lines should be preserved, and some new lines should be added rather than replaced or supplanted.
Tabib, my last question to you. We've got literally 1 minute left. I'm terribly sorry about that. Nigara Göksel posed a very interesting question to the panel, and again, I'm gonna quote her. She asked about connectivity specifically. She said that can connectivity talks be rejuvenated while differences over the Armenian constitutional amendment issue drag on? Those differences drag on. What do you make of that? Do you think? Before sorting out those constitutional obstacle or Minsk group thing, parties could also work in a very intensive manner on the connectivity issue about the Zangezur corridor and other links, because we shouldn't lose our time. Time is everything. What do you think?
Very shortly, Orhan, I think yes, absolutely. The thing is that there are lots of works that can be done even before the signing of the peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. For example, in terms of connectivity, for example, to do at least the assessments of the Zangezur, how much money will be needed, what kind of technical parameters would be needed for the motorway and for the railroad passing through Migri and linking western regions of mainland Azerbaijan with Nakhchivan. None of this have been done in Armenia. And if Armenia is genuinely interested in joining these connectivity projects, in being part of this global connectivity, part of the middle corridor, it needs to do this homework. It needs to conduct these assessments, work with Azerbaijan, and make sure that once the agreement is made, we could move very swiftly forward in implementing this project.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to both of you. I'm so grateful, and I very much hope that in the fullness of time, when I say in the fullness of time, I mean very soon actually, we will be able to have an expanded conversation together with our Armenian colleagues about Caucasian affairs, about the connectivity, because after all, it's a tripartite structure involving three countries. Dr. George Micheleshvili and Tabib Huseynov, I'm most grateful to both of you. Well, today's conversation was largely centered around three fundamental issues. One is Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process, which is the key element of the wider Caucasian scope, and as a central element of the discussion surrounding House of Caucasus regional integration model, wherein three countries should participate. We also reflected on issues beyond the South Caucasus, and we also reflected on the increasing role of Turkey as a key external neighbor of this region. You were watching Context, and see you very soon indeed.